The holographic message pulsed an urgent red in Dr. Sarah Chen's otherwise dimly lit laboratory, casting crimson shadows across the towers of genetic sequencers and bacterial cultures that surrounded her workstation. She had been about to call it a night when the transmission came through, bearing the highest priority clearance she'd ever seen from the Galactic Medical Council. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she authenticated her credentials. The Council rarely contacted individual doctors directly, let alone human ones. Their communications usually passed through dozens of bureaucratic layers before reaching someone of her primitive species status. The hologram expanded, filling the center of her lab with the imposing figure of High Counselor Zextal, their crystalline form refracting the light into rainbow patterns across her equipment. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had only seen the council leader in archived broadcasts. Dr. Chen, the crystalline being's translator, rendered their harmonic voice into standard galactic English. We face an unprecedented crisis. The Krex Empire is being decimated by an unknown pathogen. Their casualties number in the millions and increase exponentially by the day. Sarah's mind raced. The Krex, humanity's most feared neighbors in the galaxy. Warriors whose biological resilience made them nearly immortal in battle. Their healing factor was legendary. They could regenerate from wounds that would vaporize most other species. 17 of the most advanced medical communities in the galaxy have failed to develop a cure. Zextal continued, their crystalline form dimming slightly. The Krex's enhanced healing factor appears to be accelerating the disease rather than fighting it. Their entire civilization stands on the brink of collapse. Why contact me? Sarah asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Surely Earth's medical technology is centuries behind most council worlds. The hologram shifted, displaying horrifying statistics, infection rates, mortality figures, genetic decay patterns. Sometimes, Dr. Chen, advancing too far means forgetting crucial lessons from the past. Your species has survived countless plagues throughout your history. You understand disease in ways our eye-dependent civilizations have forgotten. The Krex. Zextal paused, their crystal structure clouding momentarily. The Krex have specifically requested you. Sarah blinked in surprise. Me? Why? Your papers on xenopathology, particularly your theory about adapting historical human antibodies to combat alien viruses, caught their attention. They believe, and we agree, that your unique perspective might see something our advanced systems have missed. A second screen materialized, showing scenes that made Sarah's stomach clench. Proud Krex warriors, their scaled bodies usually gleaming with health, lay writhing in agony. Their legendary healing factor was turning against them, their own cellular regeneration becoming a weapon of self-destruction. The mortality rate stands at 98%, Zextal continued. Those who survive the initial infection suffer complete genetic breakdown within days. The Krex. Another pause. They execute doctors who fail to cure their people. Sarah thought of humanity's first contact with the Krex just 5 years ago. Their massive warships had appeared over Earth's major cities, not to conquer, but to assess. They deemed humanity too primitive to be worth conquering. Though advanced enough to be granted provisional galactic citizenship, the humiliation of that day still stung in Earth's collective memory. She looked at her lab, at the basic equipment that must seem like children's toys to advanced council worlds. But she also saw something they might have forgotten. The marks of hands-on work, of direct observation, of learning through trial and error rather than computer models. I'll need full access to their medical data and direct contact with patients, Sarah said, already mentally cataloging the equipment she'd need. No remote diagnosis, no AI intermediaries. I have to see this thing face to face. Zextal's crystalline form brightened momentarily, their equivalent of surprise. The Krex will not appreciate such primitive methodology. Sarah began pulling sample kits from her storage units. Then they shouldn't have asked for a primitive doctor. The hologram flickered. A medical transport will arrive within the hour. The fate of a civilization rests in your hands, Dr. Chen. Do not fail them. For all our sakes. As the transmission ended, Sarah looked at her reflection in the darkened screen. Somewhere out there, the galaxy's most fearsome warriors were dying, and humanity's supposed primitive status might be their only hope for survival. She squared her shoulders and began to pack. The Krex medical station loomed before Sarah's transport like a twisted crown of thorns, its spired architecture reflecting the savage beauty of its creators. Massive solar arrays stretched for kilometers, powering medical equipment that could reconstruct entire bodies from nearly nothing. Yet even from here, she could see segments of the station running on emergency power only, entire wings dark and silent. Final approach to Quarantine Dock 7, the AI pilot announced. Warning: extreme biological hazard. All visitors must undergo full decontamination. Sarah clutched her medical kit tighter. Inside were tools that would seem archaic to the Krex. Manual syringes, optical microscopes, even glass slides. But they were tools she trusted, tools that required human intuition to use properly. The docking procedure took twice as long as normal, every second spent in another layer of decontamination. By the time the airlock cycled open, Sarah's skin tingled from the bombardment of sterilizing radiation. Chief Medical Officer Vorthak waited for her, a mountain of iridescent scales and barely contained rage. Like all Krex, he stood nearly 3 meters tall, his reinforced exoskeleton marked with the ceremonial scars of countless victories. But Sarah noticed something else: the slight tremor in his secondary arms, the dulled sheen of his scales. Early-stage infection. You bring primitive tools to treat us, human. His translator rendered his growls into clipped, angry words. Our warriors die by thousands while you insist on obsolete methodology. Sarah met his four-eyed gaze steadily. Your advanced methodology has a 98% failure rate. Maybe it's time to try something primitive. A low hiss escaped Vorthak's throat plates, whether amusement or threat. Sarah couldn't tell. Follow. I will show you our failures. Perhaps then you will understand the futility of your manual approach. They walked through corridors designed for beings twice Sarah's size. The walls pulsed with diagnostic data, endless streams of genetic sequences, and failed treatment protocols. But it was the sounds that struck her most. The keening wails of warriors who had never known defeat now facing an enemy they couldn't fight. The main treatment chamber was a cathedral of suffering. Hundreds of Krex lay in stasis pods, their bodies trying desperately to heal even as the virus turned that healing into a weapon. Medical AIs flitted between patients like anxious insects, adjusting treatments that did nothing to slow the progression of the disease. 17 species, Vorthak rumbled. The finest medical minds in the galaxy. All failed. The Arcturians tried nanite therapy. The Zen Collective attempted quantum cellular reconstruction. The Methanseers proposed timeline manipulation to prevent infection. He turned all four eyes to Sarah. What can one human do that they could not? Sarah was already pulling on her hazmat suit, checking the seals methodically. I can look my patients in the eye. I can feel their pulse with my own hands. I can see patterns your machines might miss because they're too advanced to consider something simple. You would risk direct contact. There was something new in Vorthak's voice. Not quite respect, but perhaps curiosity. The virus mutates rapidly. Your suit may not protect you. On Earth, we have a saying, Sarah said, securing her helmet. A doctor who won't touch a patient should find another profession. She pulled out a manual syringe. I need blood samples, fresh ones, drawn by hand. And I need to talk to the patients who survived longest. Their bodies might tell us something your machines haven't thought to ask. Vorthak stared at her primitive equipment, then at the rows of dying warriors. His scales shifted color slightly, a sign of internal conflict. Finally, he pressed his palm against a security scanner. Bay 12 contains our longest survivors. But be warned, human. They are warriors, proud even in death. They may not welcome your primitive touch. Sarah checked her sample kit one last time. They don't have to welcome it. They just have to survive it. As the quarantine door cycled open, she heard Vorthak rumble something in his native tongue. Her translator caught only fragments, but it sounded like an ancient Krex prayer, for the dying, for their healer, or perhaps for both. The quarantine bay's harsh light illuminated 3 surviving Krex warriors, their normally metallic scales dulled to a sickly copper. Sarah approached the nearest patient, her boots echoing in the cavernous space. Behind her, she heard Vorthak's low growl of concern. "I am Dr. Chen," she announced, her translator rendering her words into the guttural Krex language. "I'm here to examine you personally." The warrior turned all 4 eyes toward her, pupils contracting against the light. "A human healer." The words came out as a wet rasp. "Has our empire fallen so far?" "Your empire stands," Sarah replied, preparing a sterile blood collection tube. "But sometimes the greatest warriors must adapt to survive." She gestured to his arm. "May I?" A weak laugh escaped his throat plates. "We are already dead, little human. Do what you must." Sarah worked methodically, her gloved hand steady as she drew blood samples. Through her faceplate, she studied the progression of symptoms. The Krex's legendary healing factor was working overtime, trying to repair cellular damage, even as the virus used that same regeneration to spread faster. But something wasn't right. "Vorthak," she called, holding a sample up to the light. "Your records show the virus spreading through the lymphatic system first, correct?" "Yes. Our healing factor accelerates the spread through those channels." His secondary arms twitched. The tremors were getting worse. Every treatment targeting those pathways has failed. Sarah shook her head, already preparing slides from her samples. But what if that's not the primary infection route? What if? She paused, a memory from her medical history studies surfacing. What if that's just where your bodies are fighting hardest? She rushed to her portable microscope. Primitive technology compared to their quantum imagers, but sometimes older methods showed things advanced systems took for granted. The blood sample told a story that the Krex's AI doctors had missed. "It's acting like the 1918 Spanish flu," she breathed. "But evolved, adapted specifically to Krex biology." Her fingers flew over her tablet, pulling up ancient human medical records. "Your healing factor isn't accelerating the infection. It's responding to damage that's already done elsewhere." Vorthak leaned closer, his massive frame casting shadows over her workspace. "Explain." "The Spanish flu killed by triggering a cytokine storm, causing the body's immune system to overreact, attacking healthy tissue. Your healing factor isn't spreading the virus. It's trying to repair damage from your own immune response." She looked up at him. "Your bodies are literally trying too hard to heal themselves." "Impossible," Vorthak rumbled. "Our healing factor is perfect, evolved over millions of years." "Exactly," Sarah interrupted. "It's too perfect. This virus isn't killing you directly. It's tricking your perfect healing into destroying you from the inside out." She turned to her patient. "When exactly did symptoms first appear?" The warrior's throat plates clicked weakly. "After the neural enhancement procedure. Standard combat upgrade for all warriors now." Sarah's eyes widened. "Neural enhancement? Show me the procedure specs." Vorthak waved a hand, and holographic data filled the air. Sarah scanned it quickly, her heart racing. "There. The neural enhancer uses a modified virus to deliver the upgrade. Someone engineered this plague to hijack that delivery system. A biological weapon." Vorthak's scales flushed dark with rage. "Targeted specifically at our warriors." "Not just targeted. It uses your greatest strength against you." Sarah was already preparing more slides. "But this gives us an advantage. If we can understand how the Spanish flu's cytokine storm mechanism combined with the neural enhancer's delivery system." She trailed off, her mind racing through possibilities. Humanity had survived the Spanish flu without advanced medicine. Some humans had natural resistance. If she could isolate those genetic factors, combine them with the Krex's own biology. "I need access to your genetic labs," she said. And I need historical medical data from Earth's Spanish flu pandemic. Every scrap of information we have. Vorthak studied her for a long moment. You believe you can save us by looking backward. Sarah met his gaze. Sometimes the best way forward is to remember where we've been. The genetic lab's alarms blared for the third time that hour. Sarah's fingers flew across the holographic controls, her muscles aching from 20 hours of continuous work. On the main screen, another simulation failed as the virus adapted to her proposed treatment. Dr. Chen. Vorthak's voice was weaker now, the infection progressing despite his attempts to hide it. The Centaurian delegation has begun evacuation procedures. They recommend we abandon the station. Sarah barely looked up from her work. Let them run. She adjusted another genetic sequence, trying to match the Spanish flu antibodies to Krek's biology. We're close to something here. A violent tremor shook the station. Through the observation window, Sarah saw another medical ship detaching, its engines flaring bright against the void. The rats were fleeing the sinking ship, as humans might say. The virus has mutated again. A junior medical officer burst into the lab, his scales almost white with panic. Infection rate has increased by 300%. Multiple planetary populations have gone dark. The Empire's central planets have less than 2 weeks before total collapse. Sarah's hand stilled over the controls. 2 weeks. 17 advanced civilizations had failed to find a cure in months, and now she had 2 weeks to succeed where they had failed. She looked at her latest failed simulation, the virus tearing through her proposed treatment like it didn't even exist. Show me the new infection patterns, she demanded. The holographic display filled with red warning signs, showing the virus's spread across Krek's space. Entire battle fleets were going silent, their crews succumbing in days rather than weeks. The proud warrior race that had once seemed invincible was facing extinction in less time than it took to travel between their worlds. We should evacuate you to Earth, Vorthak said quietly. There is no shame in. No. Sarah's voice was steel. She pulled up her earlier research, comparing it to the new infection data. Look at this pattern. The virus isn't just spreading faster. It's targeting specific genetic markers now. The same markers your neural enhancement system uses. She brought up a historical display of the 1918 pandemic spread on Earth. The Spanish flu killed by turning our immune systems against us, but some humans had natural resistance. If we could understand why. A thought struck her. She pulled up her own genetic profile, comparing it to historical databases. There, my ancestors survived the 1918 pandemic. The resistance markers are still in my DNA, passed down through generations. How does this help us? Vorthak's secondary arms were almost completely still now. A bad sign. Human genetics are incompatible with Krek's biology. Maybe not. Sarah's mind raced. Your neural enhancement virus was designed to interface with alien biology. That's why this weapon was so effective. It used your own technology to spread. But what if we could use that same system to deliver a cure? She began programming a new simulation. If we can combine my genetic resistance markers with your enhancement delivery system, we're not trying to fight the virus directly. We're teaching your healing factor how to stop overreacting. The simulation ran. Failed. She adjusted parameters. Ran it again. Failed. Again. Again. Each failure bringing the Krek's empire closer to extinction. Through the window, more ships fled. The station's power flickered as entire sections were abandoned. Sarah's eyes burned from exhaustion, her hands shaking as she input new variables. Then, on the 47th attempt, something changed. The simulated virus didn't die, but it stopped spreading. The host's healing factor stopped attacking itself. There, Sarah's voice cracked with excitement. The resistance markers can work, but she paused, double-checking the data. But they need to be fresh, active, living. She turned to Vorthak, her face pale but determined. I need to use my own blood. Living human tissue with active resistance markers. The synthetic versions aren't strong enough. Understanding dawned in all four of his eyes. The interaction between human and Krex biology could kill you. Sarah was already rolling up her sleeve. If we don't try, your entire species dies. Besides, she managed a weak smile. What's the worst that could happen? We could both die horribly, Vorthak observed. Well then, Sarah said, preparing the extraction equipment. Let's try not to do that. Sarah's blood flowed through transparent tubes, passing through a series of genetic modulators before entering the treatment synthesis chamber. Her arm throbbed where the extraction needles pierced her skin, but she kept her eyes fixed on the medical readouts. First batch processing, she announced, her voice slightly weak. Protein markers are aligning with the neural enhancement vectors. Vorthak watched from his isolation chamber, his scales now a sickly gray. The infection had progressed to the point where he could barely stand, but his four eyes remained alert, fixed on the human doctor who bled herself to save his people. The ancient warriors of my people, he said quietly, would open their veins before battle, letting their blood strengthen the soil they fought to defend. His translator crackled with interference. We thought humans soft, untested. We were wrong. Sarah managed a thin smile. Save the eulogy. I'm not dead yet. She checked the synthesis readings. First batch is ready. We need a test subject. I volunteer. Vorthak's voice was firm despite his weakness. No. Sarah shook her head. You're too far progressed. We need someone in early stages. Someone. A younger Krex warrior stepped forward from the observation area. I showed first symptoms 6 hours ago. I offer my blood for the test. Sarah studied him. Young, strong, with the infection just beginning to take hold. The perfect test subject. She nodded. What's your name, warrior? Kextal. 4th Battalion, Imperial Guard. He moved to the treatment chamber with military precision. If this kills me, it is a better death than waiting for the plague. Sarah loaded the first batch of treatment into the delivery system. The pale golden liquid, her modified blood combined with Krex genetic material, seemed to glow under the harsh medical lights. This will hurt, she warned. Your healing factor will try to fight it at first. Kextal's throat plates clicked in what might have been amusement. Pain is nothing new to us, Doctor. She activated the delivery sequence. The treatment flowed into Kextal's system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his scales began to ripple, changing colors rapidly as his legendary healing factor encountered something entirely new, human genetic material programmed to teach it a different way to fight. Kextal roared, his body convulsing. Sarah's monitors screamed warnings as his vital signs spiked. She reached for the emergency shutdown, but Vorthak's voice stopped her. Wait, he commanded. Look at his scales. The color shifting had started to stabilize. Where there had been sickly grays and dull coppers, healthy metallic sheens began to emerge. Kextal's roars quieted to deep breathing. On Sarah's screens, infection markers began to drop. It's working, she breathed. His healing factor is learning. It's not attacking the infected cells anymore. It's containing them, just like human antibodies would. The excitement was short-lived. Her vision blurred, and she grabbed the edge of her console for support. The blood loss was affecting her more than she'd anticipated, and she could feel a burning sensation spreading from her extraction points. Her body was reacting to the Krex genetic material in the synthesis process. More warriors need treatment, she said, fighting to stay upright. Need to start another batch. Doctor. Vorthak's voice held something she'd never heard from a Krex. Concern. Your vital signs are critical. The interaction between our biologies. Doesn't matter. Sarah started the next extraction. The treatment needs fresh genetic material. Living human tissue with active resistance markers. Can't synthesize it fast enough otherwise. She saw the respect in Vorthak's eyes. The same look Krex warriors gave to their most honored champions. You would die to save those who once dismissed your kind as weak. Sarah watched her blood flow into the synthesis chamber, giving life to a cure that could save an entire civilization. Sometimes the greatest strength, she said, echoing his earlier words, is knowing when to bleed for others. The room spun, but she kept working. Somewhere in the station, she heard more warriors arriving for treatment. She had to keep going. Had to keep the synthesis running. Had to. The floor rushed up to meet her as darkness claimed the edges of her vision. Sarah faded in and out of consciousness, aware of massive figures moving around her and the constant hum of medical equipment. Her body burned where Krek's genetic material had contaminated her bloodstream during the synthesis process. Through the haze of fever, she heard voices arguing. She must rest. Her system is in shock. The voice was unfamiliar, probably one of the few remaining alien doctors. More warriors arrived by the hour. That was Vorthak, his voice stronger now that the treatment had taken hold. They need the cure. Need her blood. Sarah forced her eyes open. The medical bay swam into focus, now crowded with Krek's warriors awaiting treatment. Many stood at attention despite their illness, maintaining their military bearing even as the virus ravaged their bodies. Their scales rippled with fever colors, but their 4 eyes all fixed on her with an intensity she'd never seen before. How many? She tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. How many need treatment? Rest, Dr. Chen. Vorthak moved to her bedside, his massive frame blocking her view of the waiting warriors. The synthesis process. How many? She demanded again, stronger this time. A pause. 4,000 in this sector alone. More arriving from the outer colonies. Sarah did the calculations through her fever. Each treatment batch needed fresh genetic material. Synthetic versions weren't strong enough. Her blood could only produce so many doses at a time. She pulled the IV from her arm. Restart the extraction. Doctor. Every hour we wait, more die. She forced herself to stand, leaning heavily on the medical console. The cure works, but only with living human tissue. My tissue. I can rest when they're saved. A low sound filled the room, a thrumming that seemed to vibrate through the deck plates. Sarah realized the Krek's warriors were making it, a deep resonance from their throat plates. It took her fevered mind a moment to recognize it as their equivalent of a battle song, traditionally sung for their greatest heroes. Your people once called us primitive, she said to Vorthak as she prepared the extraction equipment. But sometimes primitive methods work best. He helped her set up the synthesis chamber, his movements careful despite his massive size. We called you primitive because you had not evolved past the need for sacrifice. Now we understand. You never needed to. The first drops of her blood entered the system. Sarah fought against the dizziness, focusing on the medical readouts. Each batch had to be perfect. Each warrior needed a specifically calibrated dose. Her hand shook as she adjusted the genetic modulators. Tell me about them, she said, nodding toward the waiting warriors. While we work, tell me who I'm saving. So he did. As her blood flowed and the cure synthesized, Vorthak spoke of each warrior's lineage, their battles, their honors. Some had defended colony worlds from space pirates. Others had served as protectors of civilian ships. Young warriors who had just earned their first battle scars. Veterans who had survived 100 campaigns only to face death from an invisible enemy. Sarah listened, using their stories to stay conscious as batch after batch was prepared. Her vision blurred, but she forced herself to focus on the controls. The burning in her veins intensified as more Krek's genetic material entered her system during synthesis, but she didn't stop. Hours passed. Warriors came and went, each receiving their dose of the cure born from her blood. Many tried to thank her, but she waved off their words, concentrating on maintaining the delicate genetic balance in each batch. Your blood runs in their veins now, Vorthak observed as the latest group departed. In our culture, that makes them your battle kin. Sarah managed a weak laugh. Quite a family I'm building. She swayed, catching herself on the console. How many more? His answer was lost as the room spun violently. The last thing she saw was his expression, not of alarm, but of profound respect. Then darkness took her again, and she fell into dreams of warriors whose lives now flowed with her blood. The seizure struck without warning. Sarah's body, already weakened by blood loss and fighting the alien genetic material in her system, began to convulse violently. Around her, Krek's medical equipment shrieked warnings as her vital signs cascaded into critical levels. Neural shock. The last remaining Centaurian doctor's crystalline form flashed urgent patterns. The interaction between human and Krek's genetics is causing a cascade failure in her nervous system. Vorthak moved with surprising speed for his size, catching Sarah before she could fall. Her skin burned against his scales, far too hot for a human. Can you stabilize her? This is beyond our experience. The Centaurian's lights pulsed with frustration. Human biology was never meant to process Krek's genetic material. The neural pathways are being rewritten. Through the haze of pain and fever, Sarah tried to speak. The cure. They needed to keep synthesizing the cure, but her body wouldn't respond, trapped in a war between human and Krek's biology. Kextal, the young warrior who'd received the first treatment, stepped forward from his guard position. She carries our blood now, as we carry hers. Could our healing factor help her? It would kill her instantly, the Centaurian warned. Human bodies can't handle. Wait. Vorthak's secondary arms moved in complex patterns as he accessed medical data. The synthesis process already introduced Krek's genetics into her system. That's what's killing her. But if we could control it, guide it with healthy Krek's blood. Sarah managed to force her eyes open, finding Vorthak's four-eyed gaze. She tried to tell him it was too risky, that they should focus on producing more cure. But another seizure took her words away. I volunteer my blood. Kextal was already rolling up his sleeve, his scales gleaming with renewed health. She saved my life. Let me try to save hers. More voices joined his, warriors stepping forward, offering their blood. Those she had saved, now trying to save her. The chamber filled with the deep thrumming of their battle song again, but this time it held a different note. Not a celebration of warriors' strength, but a prayer for healing. Her body is too weak for a direct transfusion, the Centaurian warned. The shock would kill her. Then we adapt. Vorthak's voice held the same determination Sarah had shown hours earlier. Use the synthesis chamber in reverse. Filter our blood through it. Let it modify our healing factor to match her genetics. Sarah felt herself being moved, gentle despite the massive hands carrying her. The synthesis chamber hummed to life around her, but differently now. Through vision that faded in and out, she saw Krek's warriors, dozens of them, connected to the machine. Their blood, carrying the most powerful healing factor in the known galaxy, flowed through the genetic modulators. Stay with us, Dr. Chen. Vorthak's voice seemed to come from very far away. You taught us that strength isn't just about healing ourselves. Now let us help heal you. The modified Krek's blood entered her system. Fire raced through her veins, but different from before. This wasn't the chaotic reaction that had been killing her. This was controlled, purposeful. Their enhanced healing factor, carefully tuned to work with her human biology. Sarah's back arched as the change took hold. She heard the Centaurian doctor exclaiming about impossible genetic readings, about human DNA incorporating Krek's healing abilities in ways that defied medical science. But none of that mattered as much as the faces she saw around her, warriors standing at attention, giving their blood and their strength to save the human who would bullet for them. The neural patterns are stabilizing, someone reported. Her body is accepting the modified healing factor. The pain began to fade. Sarah felt strength returning to her limbs, but different than before. She could feel the Krek's healing factor working within her, changed by her own genetics into something entirely new. Human and Krek's, primitive and advanced, merged into something neither species had ever seen before. She reached up and caught Vorthak's massive hand in her small one. Thank you, she whispered. The mighty Krek's warrior bowed his head. No, Dr. Chen. Thank you for teaching us that the strongest warriors are not always those who heal the fastest, but those who are willing to bleed the most for others. 3 months after the plague crisis, Sarah stood before the Galactic Medical Council, her newly iridescent eyes reflecting the shimmer of their crystalline chamber. The genetic merger between human and Krex biology had left its mark. Subtle scale-like patterns traced her skin, and her healing rate now rivaled that of the warrior she had saved. "The last quarantine zones have been cleared," she reported, her voice steady. "The cure has been successfully synthesized and distributed to all Krex territories. No new cases have been reported in the past month." High Counselor Zexel's form pulsed with approval. "You have accomplished what 17 advanced civilizations could not, Dr. Chen. But the implications of your cure go far beyond saving the Krex Empire." Behind Sarah stood Vorthak, no longer as her patient, but as the newly appointed ambassador of Krex medical affairs. His massive frame, once intimidating, now served as a reminder of how far both their species had come. "The genetic bridge you created," Vorthak rumbled, "has opened new possibilities in xenomedicine. Our warriors now train not just to heal themselves, but to understand how they might help heal others." Sarah nodded. The Krex Empire had undergone a profound transformation. Their warrior culture, once focused solely on military might, now incorporated medical knowledge into their traditions. Young warriors spent time in hospitals before earning their first battle scars, learning that true strength sometimes meant healing instead of fighting. "We have established the first joint human Krex medical academy," she continued, pulling up holographic plans, "a place where both species can learn from each other. The Krex's advanced healing techniques combined with human intuition and historical experience." The council chamber filled with approving harmonics. What had started as a desperate measure to save a dying species had evolved into something revolutionary. The Krex Empire, once seen as mere warriors, were becoming known as guardians of galactic health. "And what of you, Dr. Chen?" Zextal asked. "Your genetic modification is unprecedented. You stand as a bridge between two species." Sarah touched the scale-like patterns on her arm. "I'm learning to adapt, just as the Krex learned to see beyond their traditional views of strength. The healing factor has stabilized in my system, creating something neither human nor Krex, but a proof that our species can do more than just coexist. We can evolve together." Vorthak stepped forward. "The warriors who share blood with Dr. Chen have formed a new guard unit. We call them the Healer's Kinship. They serve as protectors of medical knowledge and guardians of those who would follow in her path." The chamber's lights shifted, creating patterns that Sarah now recognized as the council's highest approval. But it was what happened next that truly marked how much had changed. Vorthak knelt, bringing himself to Sarah's eye level, an act unheard of in Krex culture. "Once, we called humans primitive. We saw your need for doctors, for healing touch, as weakness. Now we understand that your so-called primitive ways held wisdom we had forgotten in our advancement." Sarah smiled, remembering those desperate hours in the synthesis chamber. Sometimes the oldest methods are the best teachers. "The Krex Empire formally requests," Vorthak continued, "that Earth establish permanent medical exchanges with all our worlds. We would learn your primitive wisdom and share our advanced techniques. Together, we might become something greater than either of us could be alone." As Sarah looked around the council chamber, she saw not just approval, but understanding. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had been reminded that progress wasn't always about moving forward. Sometimes it meant remembering where you came from, and recognizing that strength could wear many faces. "I accept," she said simply, her iridescent eyes meeting Vorthak's on one condition: that we never forget that the greatest advances in medicine often come not from our machines or our genes, but from our willingness to help others, even at great cost to ourselves. The Krex warrior's scales shifted in the pattern she now recognized as deep respect. "That lesson, Dr. Chen, is written in our blood. We will never forget." As the council chamber filled with the deep thrumming of the Krex battle song, now transformed into a healer's anthem, Sarah felt the future pulse through her modified veins. Human and Krex, primitive and advanced, healer and warrior, all flowing together towards something new and wonderful.